The confrontation that took place at the event was nothing short of a media firestorm, and it drew significant attention not because of who was involved, but because of what it represented. It wasn't merely a disagreement between individuals. It was a symbolic clash between two very different worlds, one built on the craft of storytelling and public imagination, and the other rooted in messaging, policy, and ideological clarity. This event turned into a microcosm of the growing tension between celebrity culture and the political machinery that governs public life. The setting itself, an event that brought together figures from various spheres of influence, was charged with expectation. With cameras rolling and eyes watching, what might have otherwise been a private disagreement turned into a very public moment. On one side stood a figure from a domain where expression is fluid, unstructured, and open to interpretation. On the other side stood someone whose entire professional life is built on measured language, firm positions, and messaging discipline. These two roles do not often sit easily next to each other, and when they collide, sparks tend to fly. What escalated the situation was not just the content of their exchange, but the fundamental mismatch in communication styles. One side, animated and impassioned, sought to express concern or criticism in a way that may have seemed confrontational or dramatic. The other side, equipped with the precision of a political spokesperson, responded with calculated rebuttals, adhering to talking points and rhetorical techniques that are designed to maintain control of the narrative. The result was an impasse, an exchange where neither party seemed willing to yield, and both appeared increasingly frustrated by the other's refusal to meet on common ground. Spectators noted how quickly the mood shifted. What began as a seemingly civil interaction took on a confrontational edge, and the room reportedly grew tense. Body language stiffened. Voices rose. Security and aides appeared increasingly alert, sensing the mounting tension. The moment reached a tipping point when the discussion ceased to be about ideas and transformed into a contest of authority and presence. In a space where influence is currency, both individuals were asserting theirs, but through entirely different frameworks. One relied on emotional resonance and the raw impact of expression, while the other leaned on institutional authority and rhetorical command. This dynamic reflects a broader cultural tension that has become more pronounced in recent years. The cause. Lines between celebrity and politics have been eroding. Public figures from entertainment have become increasingly vocal about social and political issues, while political actors have learned to borrow from the tools of celebrity to manage their public image. The overlap is fertile ground for dialogue, but also for misunderstanding. Both parties, in this case, likely walked into the situation with assumptions about intent, credibility, and the meaning behind each other's words, that only widened the gap between them. This isn't the first time that figures from different public domains have clashed, and it won't be the last. But this particular event stood out because of how visibly it played out, and how deeply it tapped into current anxieties about who gets to speak, who gets to be heard, and what happens when those with differing platforms engage without shared rules of discourse. There was no moderator, no agreed-upon format, and certainly no buffer to soften the blows of misunderstanding. Each word carried the weight of not just personal belief, but symbolic meaning. Observers and commentators have since analyzed the moment through various lenses, some calling it a display of passion and authenticity, others framing it as a breakdown in decorum. Yet beneath these interpretations lies something more telling: the difficulty of navigating conversations where both parties come armed with influence but not necessarily a shared language. In the absence of mutual understanding, even the most well-intentioned exchanges can become explosive. Ultimately, the event served as a jarring reminder that visibility and voice do not guarantee connection or clarity. It exposed the fragility of cross-domain interactions and the ease with which misalignment can spiral into full-blown confrontation. The public's reaction, ranging from amusement to outrage, only underscored how hungry people are for authenticity, but also how unforgiving the public stage can be when things go awry. Karoline Leavitt's response during the high-profile exchange demonstrated a disciplined and unwavering communication style that has come to define her public persona. As tensions rose, many observed how she maintained a sense of composure and control that contrasted sharply with the emotionally charged atmosphere. Rather than responding in kind to escalating intensity, she relied on her training and political instincts to hold the line, choosing measured words, deliberate pacing, and calm body language, even as the discussion grew contentious. Her ability to stay composed under pressure is not incidental. It is the product of a professional environment where messaging must be both strategic and resilient. In her role as a White House press secretary, she is no stranger to scrutiny. Every word she delivers is subject to immediate analysis, often from polarized audiences. That pressure creates a very particular kind of skill set, the capacity to speak with precision, to stay on message, and to anticipate not only the content of a challenge, but the emotional undercurrents that might accompany it. In this instance, those skills were on full display. What many found striking was how she managed to control the tempo of the exchange. Rather than being drawn into an emotional back and forth, she steered the conversation toward familiar rhetorical terrain, policy points, constitutional principles, and broader ideological framing. Her approach did not necessarily aim to resolve the conflict or change minds in the moment. Instead, it sought to affirm a consistent narrative, reinforcing the priorities of the administration and asserting the legitimacy of her position without directly inflaming the situation. This discipline can sometimes come across as unyielding or rehearsed, especially in a highly emotional or spontaneous setting. However, in the world of political communication, the ability to remain unaffected by provocation is often seen as a strength. It signals to supporters and critics alike that the spokesperson is not easily rattled, that their convictions are firm, and that their role is to defend and articulate policy, not to engage in personal sparring. In this light, her performance during the incident was not only defensive, but demonstrative, intended to show the resilience of the political office she represents. The scene also offered insight into the evolving expectations placed on public officials, especially women in positions of power. Leavitt's stance during the confrontation reflected not only her individual professionalism, but also the broader pressure to project both competence and control in spaces where authority can be challenged at any moment. Her refusal to deviate from her messaging, even when confronted by high emotion, revealed a tactical choice to rely on consistency rather than improvisation. That choice may not always be perceived as empathetic or flexible, but it communicates strength in environments where credibility is constantly tested. Observers from across the political spectrum offered differing interpretations of the moment. Supporters viewed her performance as commanding and unflinching, a clear sign that she would not be intimidated or thrown off balance. To them, this was an official doing exactly what was expected, defending policy, standing firm in the face of criticism, and showing that the administration's positions are not up for casual debate. Critics, on the other hand, questioned whether such rigidity can limit genuine engagement, pointing out that emotional intelligence and adaptability are also valuable in navigating public discourse. Regardless of where one stands, it is difficult to deny that her response was effective in accomplishing a very specific goal, keeping control of the narrative. It is also worth noting how she handled the optics of the moment. Her posture, facial expressions, and tone were all tightly aligned with her verbal messaging. She did not roll her eyes, interrupt, or visibly react with annoyance, choices that may seem small but are, in the political arena, carefully calculated. Her professionalism in this context was not just about words, but about presence. And that presence conveyed that she was in charge of herself, if not the room. In the aftermath of the exchange, her team emphasized the importance of staying focused on the policy issues at hand. This emphasis on substance over spectacle served as a continuation of her approach during the encounter itself. She did not allow the conversation to drift into emotional territory or personal grievance. Instead, she redirected repeatedly to points about governance, civic responsibility, and institutional trust. That redirection was a key reason the moment didn't spiral further. It shifted attention from personalities to principles, from heat to structure. In a media landscape that often rewards outbursts and dramatic flair, her steadiness created a stark contrast. It reminded audiences, friendly or not, that in the world of official communication, message control is paramount. Whether One sees that control as admirable or overly calculated, it is clearly part of a deliberate strategy. And in that moment, it worked. The aftermath of the confrontation drew immediate and widespread public reaction, with social media platforms lighting up as users dissected every detail of the incident. What stood out most was the decision to abruptly exit the situation, a choice that seemed to resonate far beyond the room in which it occurred. People were quick to speculate about the motivations behind the move, some interpreting it as a refusal to continue in what had become a toxic or hostile environment, while others viewed it as an emotional response that betrayed a lack of composure. The polarized interpretations underscored how charged and sensitive the moment had become. For some, the exit signaled self-respect and boundary setting, an act of walking away from a conversation that had turned unproductive or personally invasive. They saw the decision as emblematic of someone choosing dignity over drama, refusing to entertain what they perceived as a political ambush or an aggressive rhetorical posture. In their view, there is nothing inherently weak about stepping away. In fact, it can be a powerful assertion of control, choosing silence over shouting, distance over confrontation. Others, however, were quick to frame the moment as a lapse in professionalism. Within certain circles, especially those accustomed to the high-stakes nature of public discourse, the act of leaving mid-conflict was read as a failure to meet the expectations of a high-profile figure. There's an implicit standard placed on those in the spotlight to remain steady, articulate, and present, even in moments of discomfort or opposition. Walking away, then, can be interpreted as a breach of that unspoken contract, a retreat rather than a response, an emotional reaction rather than a considered tactic. The contrast between these viewpoints speaks to a broader societal debate about emotional expression, particularly in high-pressure public settings. There's a growing movement that values authenticity and emotional intelligence, championing the idea that people, regardless of their status, should be allowed to react in human ways when confronted with conflict. In this framework, the decision to leave isn't a breakdown but a boundary, a line drawn in the name of self-preservation. It invites empathy rather than judgment, suggesting that even public figures are entitled to moments of vulnerability. Still, others argue that influence comes with responsibility, and that in moments of tension, leaders, whether cultural or political, must model resilience. From this perspective, staying in the room, listening, and responding with grace under pressure is the true mark of leadership. By walking away, critics contend that opportunity is lost. The message received is one of disengagement rather than dialogue, avoidance rather than advocacy. For those who hold this view, the exit undermines the idea that public discourse, even when uncomfortable, is necessary and worth enduring. Beyond the individual implications, the event has stirred conversation about the increasingly volatile space where politics and culture intersect. These are not neutral grounds. They are often fraught with preconceptions, ideological divisions, and high emotional stakes. When someone from one domain enters the other, particularly during live or highly publicized events, they do so at considerable risk. Expectations clash, norms diverge, and when tension erupts, every gesture, word, or movement becomes a symbol for something greater. In this case, the exit wasn't just a personal decision, it became a public spectacle, dissected for its meaning, intent, and implications. Public figures today operate under a microscope where nuance is often flattened in favor of virality. An action like walking out is instantly clipped, reposted, and recast through countless narratives. Some of those narratives are sympathetic, others cynical, but all contribute to a larger cultural moment in which perception can matter more than context. The fact that a single gesture became the focus of such intense discussion speaks to the power and burden of visibility in the digital age. Every move becomes content. Every decision invites judgment. In many ways, this reaction reflects a deeper cultural tension around conflict itself. Some value resolution, even when it's difficult or unlikely. Others prioritize disengagement as a legitimate form of protest or self-defense. The debate about the walkout encapsulates both of these instincts, illustrating the challenge of navigating public disagreements without becoming consumed by them. It also reflects an increasing expectation that those in the public eye not only manage their message, but their emotional responses as well. For better or worse, this incident has become a flashpoint for larger conversations about leadership, emotional control, public performance, and the ever-shifting expectations placed on those who occupy prominent roles in society. The incident brought renewed focus to the increasingly complex relationship between celebrity influence and political authority. As cultural figures step more boldly into the political arena, moments like this underscore just how fragile and unpredictable those interactions can be. What once might have been viewed as two separate spheres, entertainment and governance, are now inextricably linked, and the consequences of that convergence are not always harmonious. In the past, public figures from the entertainment world generally kept their political opinions private or shared them only during rare interviews or philanthropic events. That dynamic has shifted dramatically. Social media has enabled direct communication with millions of followers, giving cultural personalities unprecedented power to shape narratives, challenge institutions, and insert themselves into national debates. This empowerment has created a new form of political participation, one that is often unfiltered, emotionally charged, and able to bypass traditional media structures. That shift has not gone unnoticed by those in political office. On one hand, elected officials recognize the reach and impact of celebrity voices. On the other, they must contend with the reality that these figures operate outside conventional political rules. They are not beholden to party discipline or diplomatic language. They can afford to be provocative. In fact, provocation is often rewarded. But when these contrasting styles meet head-on, one built on institutional authority, the other on public persona, the result can be a volatile mix of posturing, emotion, and miscommunication. This latest confrontation was a case study in that very dynamic. The conversation started as a pointed disagreement, but quickly transformed into something more symbolic. One side represented the disciplined messaging of government, a structure rooted in law, policy, and precedent. The other spoke from a place of personal conviction, emotion, and cultural relevance. Neither side was necessarily wrong in their posture, but their inability to find shared ground demonstrated just how difficult it is to create meaningful dialogue across such fundamentally different frameworks. Observers were quick to pick up on the implications. Some praised the courage it takes to confront power and challenge official narratives, regardless of one's background. Others questioned whether such encounters are productive at all, or whether they serve more as performance than substance. Still others worried about the erosion of civility, noting that when politics becomes theater and theater becomes politics, the space for reasoned debate begins to shrink. These are not just academic concerns. They speak to a larger cultural anxiety about the state of discourse in a media-saturated society. The influence of celebrities in political matters is not inherently harmful. Many have used their platforms to elevate important causes, raise awareness, and even help pass legislation. But the risk emerges when fame itself becomes a form of credibility, when being well-known is mistaken for being well-informed. Political processes are complex, requiring careful negotiation, compromise, and expertise. Emotional appeals can catalyze action, but they can also oversimplify or distort. The tension lies in balancing the immediacy of cultural influence with the slow, deliberate pace of governance. From the political side, there is also a temptation to harness the power of celebrity, to borrow some of its shine in the hopes of expanding reach or swaying public opinion. That strategy can be effective in the short term, but it carries long-term costs. When political legitimacy becomes entangled with cultural relevance, it becomes harder to distinguish between authority rooted in policy and authority rooted in popularity. The result is a blurring of lines that can leave the public unsure of who is leading and why. The confrontation also revealed how the public reacts to such moments. Many viewers did not just see two individuals clashing, they saw a representation of deeper societal divides: emotion versus reason, visibility versus responsibility, authenticity versus professionalism. These binaries are overly simplistic, but they point to real tensions in how people expect power to be wielded and truth to be expressed. In that sense, the moment became a kind of Rorschach test, reflecting the values and fears of whoever happened to be watching. Ultimately, the debate around this incident was not just about personalities or even politics. It was about the evolving shape of influence itself. Who gets to speak in public arenas? What kind of speech is considered legitimate? And what happens when institutions meet individuals who operate by entirely different rules? These questions remain unresolved, but they are becoming more urgent as the boundaries between culture and governance continue to dissolve in real time. The incident and its aftermath serve as more than just a headline. They encapsulate the volatile intersection of cultural power, political messaging, and public expectation in today's hyper-connected world. What might have once been dismissed as a momentary dispute has now become a reflection of deeper structural shifts in how authority is perceived, how discourse is conducted, and how influence is asserted. The public's response, ranging from admiration to criticism, from sympathy to scorn, reveals a society in flux, one grappling with new forms of leadership, new expressions of power, and an ever-evolving definition of credibility. What's clear is that no public exchange happens in a vacuum. Every word spoken, every gesture made, and every choice, whether to remain or to walk away, becomes part of a larger narrative. This narrative is shaped not just by the individuals involved, but by how audiences interpret their actions through personal values, political leanings, and emotional responses. The divide in public opinion highlights a broader fragmentation in how people engage with authority, celebrity, and conflict. These aren't just individual disagreements, they're symbolic confrontations that tap into national conversations about respect, communication, authenticity, and responsibility. In such a climate, the stakes for public figures are higher than ever. The margin for error is slim. Audiences expect clarity, integrity, and emotional intelligence, yet they are also quick to seize on any perceived inconsistency or misstep. Political figures must navigate a world where policy cannot be separated from perception, and cultural figures must contend with the reality that their influence carries real-world consequences. Both domains are increasingly interconnected, and neither can afford to ignore the weight of that relationship. Moving forward, moments like this will likely continue to occur, not because of individual personalities, but because the conditions that produce them are now built into the fabric of public life. The boundary between entertainment and politics is no longer a wall, it's a permeable membrane where voices from each side pass freely, often colliding. The challenge is not to prevent these collisions, but to learn how to manage them more constructively. That requires listening as much as speaking, restraint as much as expression, and perhaps most of all, a willingness to understand rather than simply react. This particular incident may fade from the immediate news cycle, but the themes it unearthed, power, communication, emotion, and respect, will remain central to public discourse. As society continues to redefine leadership and influence, it must also reckon with the responsibilities those roles demand. Whether in a press room, a public forum, or on a global stage, the way individuals choose to speak and to respond will shape not only their reputations, but the tone of our collective conversation. And that, more than any single confrontation, is what truly matters.